Hello, everyone. I'm George from Ireland. This video is contrasting Donald J. Trump to Ronald Wilson Reagan. In case you don't know, Ronald Reagan was president of the United States from 1981 to 1989. And back then, Trump was this ram raiding New York property developer, tycoon, not quite gone bankrupt by the first time, married to a Czechoslovak, having a very public affair with a Southern belle, Marla Maples, to the extent he would phone up New York newspapers and demand they put headlines advertising his philandering, saying Marla Maples says Donald Trump gave me the best sex in my life. He's that kind of family values guy, Donald Trump. Now, I don't care about his womanizing, but you think the Republican faithful, or very much holier than thou, would care about it. And Ronald Reagan, he was a family values guy, but I think an adulterous way. Well, not that it bothers me. But Reagan was present towards the end of the Cold War, and he announced a one-third increase in defense spending. The Soviet Union, as it then was, couldn't keep pace with that. The Soviet Union had Russia as its core. The Russians are about 50% of the population of the Soviet Union, about 80% of its land area. And the Soviet Union finally dissolved in 1991, so about 2.5 years after Ronald Reagan had to retire from the presidency. And Trump was a registered Republican at the time, said he concurred with the principles of the Republican Party. Of course, he'll say anything. And in 1988, when Reagan was going to have to step down because he was coming to the end of his second term, the Republicans were going to select, indeed selected the then Vice President, George H.W. Bush, as their nominee, and indeed he won. Who was going to be his vice president? He cast around for credible candidates. In the end, he picked Senator Danforth Quayle, a rather less than credible candidate. Nevertheless, they won. But when they were still trying to make up their mind who'd be the vice president, Donald Trump tried to make a bid for the Republican vice presidency and was just laughed out of town. What a sad declension the grand old party has undergone in under 40 years. But so Ronald Reagan was a cold warrior, called the Soviet Union the evil empire. Now, as Putin would never cease to remind us, the Russian Federation is the chief successor state, the Soviet Union, which is why it's got that seat in the United Nations Security Council. At the end of the Cold War, Russia and the USSR had populations about at parity. And now the United States has a population close to 3 times that of Russia, and so on. In terms of military power, they're kind of at parity. Now, the Americans had technology a generation ahead of Russia, and it's still the case. But back then, although the Soviets had more troops and tanks, possibly more artillery, the Americans had more of everything else. And now the American advantage in terms of planes or warships is even greater than it was. And also in terms of troop numbers, tanks, howitzers, they were kind of at parity. If anything, it's actually more in America's favor after this, after the Russians have lost 2/3 of their tank fleet in Ukraine. Those that are left are usually very old and in a poor state of repair. So America's advantage over the Russian Federation is much greater than that of the United States over the Soviet Union in the 1980s. But Ronald Reagan had this Manichaean view of the world, often false, and supported dictators all over the world, despite this typical American chutzpah claiming they were spreading democracy. Sometimes spread democracy, often destroyed democracy and spread dictatorship in the name of the corporocracy. And Reagan, often perceived as an evil bastard, supporting the slaughterhouse states in Central America, massacring their people, some of the cruelest tyrants in the Caribbean, piling laud on them. And he could have just pragmatically say, we have to have cordial diplomatic relations, arms sales, without going out of his way to sing hymns of praise to them, which is really sickening. But very few Americans would know or care about that. But give Reagan his due. He wanted to bring down the Soviet Union, and he achieved it. And he did not go doing their work. And he said he didn't believe in appeasement. That is betraying your allies and emboldening your enemies. And that is exactly what Donald Trump is doing, letting down the Ukraine, an American ally, with the Budapest Memorandum, with the United States, where they guaranteed Ukrainian security, along with the United Kingdom. And Ukraine gave away its nuclear weapons for free, and Russia promised to respect their independence, territorial integrity. You see, they've reneged on that. Only Trump would be stupid enough to trust the Russians on this one. You can see why he's such a bad businessman and why he's lost tens of billions of dollars and gone out of business gone bankrupt 4 times. Donald Trump wrecking relations with all America's allies, Western European countries, Canada likewise. Who's next? Japan, South Korea, Australia, in order to mollycoddle its enemies, like the Russian Federation, North Korea, goodness knows who else, handing a victory to the Taliban. And I know that Joe Biden followed through with that plan, but it might not have done if Trump hadn't laid the groundwork. By the time Biden came to office, maybe too late to save Afghanistan. So it's a terrible degeneration of the Republican Party since then. Wow. And you see how Trump is really letting them down. Anyway, Bill Clinton, who was a Democratic president, 1993 to 2001, he was in office when that Budapest Memorandum was signed, and he now says he rues it. In retrospect, it seems to have been a colossal error. But of course, we didn't see it that way at the time. They wanted to prevent nuclear weapons proliferation, have as few nuclear weapon states as possible, and say if you didn't want India or Pakistan to develop nuclear arsenals, or whoever, North Korea, then it was good to set an example by persuading other countries to divest themselves of their nuclear missiles and so forth. But had Ukraine retained them, then presumably Russia would never have attacked. But you can see how Trump is jettisoning all these fine Republican principles, and the Republican Party faithful seems to let him get away with it. Now, I know the Russian Federation doesn't have this communist ideology. Nevertheless, it tends to support tyrannies all around the world, whereas the United States now seldom does. So it's very, very pernicious. There is no message of social justice out of Russia. It's not that they're there to offer better public services or greater economic equity or something like that, which communism was supposed to be about. It's really about tyranny. They will propose the cult of the personality, stripping people of their civil liberty, opposition to human rights, particularly homosexuality, things like that. So hyper-nationalism, militarism, sadism, machismo, that's what the Putin regime stands for. And then he finds ideological bedfellows, the People's Republic of China, the Democratic People's Republic of North Korea, goodness knows where else, to some extent Venezuela, certain African juntas in Mali, Gabon, the Central African Republic, Sudan, I'm not sure where else, the Islamic Republic of Iran. So things like fair trials and freedom of expression, these are anathema to him. Well, and obviously he has an ideological soulmate in Donald J. Trump. It's a bromance. Well, it's very disturbing and depressing. Thank you for watching my video. Make sure you subscribe on Patreon, donate PayPal, georgecallahan79@gmail.com. Toodaloo.